Hey everyone, welcome to the 351st episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patrons Daniel Rhodes, Simon L. Smith, and Ryan Lagod. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Matt Enlow. Today we've got Louiza Vick on the show. She is an agent at WPA, which is an agency that represents department heads, directors, cinematographers, editors, those sorts of people, our people, right? And so we have a really great conversation with her. She is mostly on the feature side. So we talk mostly about the way that she guides her clients through the act of picking what projects to do, how to figure out what their career is going to ultimately look like and shape that to be something long and fruitful and special. And we dig in to talk to her about how directors like us can work with clients like hers.
Yeah, and her client list is like A list. She represents like Larkin Seipel, who shot Everything Everywhere All at Once. Shane Hurlbut, who shot Terminator Salvation and does a ton of like film education stuff. Her client shot Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and War of the Planet of the Apes and District 9 and Smile and Emily the Criminal and all these other things. Kong Skull Island, Super 8, 300, and Natalie Kingston, who shot Blackbird. Remember we had the showrunner on the podcast. Really awesome clients. And to me, like the main thrust behind this interview was like, hey, how can someone like us get to work with clients like yours? She has like amazing production designers, amazing line producers, amazing editors on her roster. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are editors and production designers and cinematographers, as well as directors. And so I think she gives some interesting insight, both from the viewpoint of her clients and like, how she's a resource as an agent, and also for directors and filmmakers, us just getting, a real nuts and bolts idea of how to work with, like the cinematographer of Terminator Salvation.
I think it's really a well-timed interview for us personally as well, because Oren, I think that you in particular are on a crusade right now to stop thinking small. And one of the things that I think filmmakers often will do is they'll go to their collaborators that are familiar, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I think if you look at, say, Larkin Seipel's resume, it's a lot of the same directors over and over and over again. And as we talk about in the interview, that's a very fruitful, essential part of everyone's creative journey and career. That being said, it's easy to think, oh, this person is whose work I admire or who would be perfect for this job. It's easy to think that, oh, they're too busy. Oh, they're too expensive. Oh, they're too big for this job. That used to be the case. When you start out, that's probably true, right? Your first $50,000 commercial or your sketch for a funny internet website or, whatever. But at a certain point, you need to stop thinking like that. As your budgets get bigger and your work gets more prestigious and you're doing national broadcast spots and movies and TV shows and stuff, you should bring those collaborators along with you. But they're going to get busy and you're going to need additional people to work with. And so thinking small is a thing that sometimes can get in the way of our success. I know that you have explicitly been like, I'm going to go for it. I think that attitude, that philosophy informed this decision. So if you want to go for it, you want to reach for the stars and work with that DP that you constantly are pulling their stills from their work to put in your lookbooks, you can reach out to them. And we talk about that and how to do it in this episode.
I hope you enjoy the conversation. Before we talk to Louiza,
Patreon.com/JustShootItPod is the perfect place to gift yourself a little bit of film education by subscribing at any of our patronage levels, which keeps the show going. You guys know the deal.
Give money to people that you don't know for no reason.
Have you heard of a parasocial relationship? That's when you think you know someone. It feels like you know someone, but you don't know them, but you basically know them through the internet or something. So like the way you feel about Conan O'Brien.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think podcasting...
I did meet him once. And by meet him, I mean I was in a crowd full of college students watching him make fun of my English professor at UCLA.
Yeah, that's not meeting him. Anyway, if you feel like you know us, you want to buy us a cup of coffee, or you want to help out editor Noah, we got some fun stuff coming up in 2023. Going to make it happen. I'm feeling optimistic about this year, and pledge now
This is probably the longest Patreon plug we've ever made, and does sound like an NPR.
I'm trying to conjure my PBS phone bank pledge drive youth.
Do you ever listen to a podcast and you like hit skip forward 30 seconds to get past the ads and like you're still in an ad? Still in the ad.
Well, stay tuned to Yanni Live the Acropolis, your local PBS station.
Now the references are beyond me.
Anyway, patreon.com/justshootitpod. So without further delay, let's hop into our conversation with Louiza Vick.
We're here with Louiza Vick. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So you are an agent. We said you're a below the line agent, which is a term that we don't love, but it's an industry standard term, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what you do, like what a below the line agent does?
I'm an agent and partner and co-head of features at WPA. What a below the line agent does is, in a nutshell, obviously, we're looking for new opportunities for clients. We're negotiating contracts. We're doing a lot of, I would say, the standard things that agents do. I think what excites me, and I think us as a team, and I think also what separates us is kind of the intangible, which is the day-to-day conversations with clients about what is the right opportunity to take at any given moment, providing guidance and advice about, again, the decision making, as well as being there to support them if there's issues on set, if there's other things that come up, both personally and professionally, that we can help the client navigate. So, in broad strokes, obviously we're looking for opportunities for clients, bring them to them and negotiating contracts. But the intangible, I think, is really important, which is, again, having that kind of dialogue with the client and helping them guide their career. And the goal is to hope that they create fulfilling careers that they're going to look back on and be proud of.
That's cool. Yeah, it's funny because I think of, as a director, you hear about them having like agents, managers, and lawyers. But all the cinematographers and production designers I know, they mainly only have agents. And it kind of sounds like from your description, you kind of cover like agent and what a manager would do, in terms of like career guidance.
A little bit of a lawyer too, even, right? Like when you get into contracts, right?
You're exactly right. So it's a little bit of everything. And again, the managerial approach is very much part of our WPA culture. And I think something that we all collectively sought out in terms of when we all came together, that was a really important component to us. It wasn't just about, booking clients and moving on to the next. It was really about formulating relationships with clients where we feel like we can provide guidance and really help clients shape their careers. So that's always been very important to all of us as a collective. And then, of course, there's other components of, you're also acting as a lawyer to reviewing contracts, making comments, things like that. And handling all the negotiations. So we're wearing, I would say, multiple hats at any given moment. Sometimes we're even a bit of a therapist. It's a job that I think encompasses a lot of different things. And I think as an agent, I think it is important to have, I would say, a humane approach. At least that's, I think, something that's, important to me and also to my colleagues, because I think in this industry, especially when there's so many transactions happening, I think when you approach things from more of a humane standpoint, I think people respond to that. And that's what creates long-lasting relationships, not only between agents and clients, but also between, agents and also buyers too, because they trust us that, if we're sending somebody to them, that they know that they're someone that we like and also feel passionate about, and they're going to be respectful human beings. So I think that's a big big component.
Mm-hmm. So when you say humane, you mean it's about just being personable, basically.
Exactly. It's about being personable and approaching things from like a fair, respectful way. I think agents, over a course of obviously many, many years, decades, sometimes have a reputation of being a bit of a car salesman type of
Sure.
a personality. And I think our approach has always been approaching things from a more personable, thoughtful kind of manner.
I think it's funny from our perspective sometimes, like as directors, when we talk to like our DP friends that are recently repped by someone like you or something, and we text them and we're like, hey, I have a shoot coming up on, next month. Are you available? And they're like, yeah, just contact my agent. Like sometimes the agent does feel kind of a little bit like the adversary because it seems like it instantly makes it from a personal relationship to like a business relationship, I've been on the flip side where I've been, I'm going to work on a car commercial or something. And, I need a DP that's really good with cars. And so like our producer will contact someone like you and say like, hey, we need this type of cinematographer, or this type of editor, this type of line producer or whatever. And then it's like you become like a huge resource for the director, Let's say I want to shoot a commercial and I wonder if Larkin Seipel would shoot my commercial and I contact you to see if he's available. Like, how much context do you need to know about the project before you check with him? And how does that work? Do you just text him and say, hey, Larkin, are you available this week in March? Or I just did a project recently with like a cinematographer that I kind of like considered out of my league. But then, we just called his agent and it ended up working out, and so I just kind of want to give some insight to our listeners that aren't the Daniels, that aren't making a Marvel movie, like how realistic it is for them to get a client, like the realistic answer.
Yeah, the realistic answer. Yeah.
It obviously depends on what you're working on, of course, like whether Larkin would be, available or whatnot. And also like whether what you're working on is in line with his sensibility. So, and that's, a very big component. We're talking to clients about what is it they want to do next. Larkin's a good example of, he goes back and forth between commercials and film and television at times. So it really depends, like, what he's looking to do next. How does that line up with what you're working on?
Is his team making the decision whether you pass something along, or does everything always get passed through to him and you say, hey, we don't think this is right for you, but as a heads up? An in-demand DP, for instance, can't be inundated with every single request that comes through. So I'm curious about
like 10 features a week.
Well, like what's the threshold basically? Is it just a judgment call from everyone on the team?
It's a team conversation as far as like we are always as a team in the know of things that are coming his way, as well as like things that we're bringing to him and discussing. And we do let him know about things that come in. We let all of our clients know anytime there's a direct inquiry about the client. And ultimately it is the client's choice whether or not to want to meet on the project, consider shooting it. But we give insight and point of view to the client as far as like our thoughts on it, but ultimately it is their decision. So that's, how we work with all of our clients.
Let me ask you a personal question. You come up with a DP, right? Or with any crew member, you work together, you're doing all sorts of, you went to film school together, you kind of work your way up. And then at a certain point, it feels like, oh, maybe they're telling me to talk to their agent because they don't want to say no, because they want to preserve our friendship. Have you ever had a circumstance where a client has been like, Louiza, you got to take the bullet for me on this one. Tell them I'm busy. I love them, but I don't want to do this project. Does that sort of stuff happen? Is that part of the job, basically?
It does happen, yes. And it is part of the job. There is an art to saying no, and how you say no is important. Everyone's career path is different, and we talk about this a lot. Also, clients' desires, aspirations, goals change. And so there are times where people's collaborations sort of deviate. You start out with working with certain directors, and then for whatever reason, like either the director made, a different choice on a project and didn't work with that DP, or perhaps, the DP is looking to do something different than he's done on the last, 4 or 5 movies. So a lot of different variables, but it is part of the job.
I knew it.
Saying no is like I said, is definitely an art. And I think, there's graceful ways to go about it. And, the other thing too, I will say is that, most of the time, though, when you're saying no, there's usually an element of
Sure.
the reality of like, it's, oftentimes not necessarily have only to do with like the material. It could be something with the availability or going out of town or what have you,
or the budget, really.
or the budget. Of course, that's a big component.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, it's not only about the rate, for that cinematographer or the editor, what have you, but it's also what does it mean in terms of what, the crew they get, what's going to be on the screen. Is this, realistic budget for what the appetite is for the script, all those things.
None of your clients want to shoot my vertical iPhone movie for some reason. Your list of clients is just insane. People that have shot just like, the coolest indie films or like the biggest, studio films. Like at some point, if someone calls you for like a Larry Fong, who shot like Super 8 and 300 and Watchmen, do you say like, well, I don't know if you can get him, but I have someone that's kind of like the young Larry Fong on my roster too, the up and coming. Like, do you offer kind of alternatives too, like when producers are reaching out?
Absolutely. Yeah. If someone calls for a client and that client's not available or won't do it, and it's a pass for them, and the producer is interested in alternative ideas, then yes. But we do protect any incoming calls for clients. So like if someone calls about a specific client and they want to send a script and set up a meeting, that is protected for that client. So there are though times
you won't like switch them, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. Unless they pass, they're not interested or unavailable. In which case, if they're unavailable, we'll still let them know that we got the call. And yeah, of course, like I said, we see ourselves as a resource. So if again, if there's an opportunity and the client that they called about is not available or not interested, then yeah, we're always willing to help.
Yeah. And by the way, I just noticed that you rep Radium Chung, who did shoot Tangerine on an iPhone. So,
yes.
Sure.
Indeed. And it's an amazing movie.
I'm curious about these meetings. Do you ever attend the meetings between like a director and a cinematographer, or do you just kind of set them up?
I never attend them. I help clients prep for them. So that means like I will give them as much insight as I have about what we know about the project, any personal history I may have with director, producer, all the people involved. And then also provide them with feedback in terms of like, if they're putting a presentation together, provide them with feedback of what I think works or doesn't work, things like that. Talk to them in general about the script.
Do you think a cinematographer needs to put together a presentation when they meet with the director? Or like, can you tell us a little bit about how to prep for that meeting?
These days, I think it is very important to put a visual presentation for a cinematographer. Same with, goes for production designer or costume designer. I think it is now expected for any HOD really to come in with a visual presentation. I think that's something that has become more or less standard. And I think it's always good to have in your back pocket to not only showcase your ideas, but also like your enthusiasm and your overall perspective on the project. I think that is something that's very important. The extent to which, as far as like how elaborate the presentation is, will depend. I think, everybody has a different approach of how they go about putting these presentations together. I always say it's also good to have kind of two versions basically of a presentation. Let's say like you've pulled, certain types of images. It's good to have a slightly different version as well, so that when you go into a meeting with a director and you're talking about the creative, if the images that you pulled out first aren't really in line with what the director is seeing, it's nice to have also another set of images to say, hey, there's this also alternative way to go about it. What do you think? And then it becomes more of a dialogue, because filmmaking, obviously, as you all know, it's very much about collaboration. And so I think it's important to show to a director that you're listening and that you are malleable as far as like being able to take what the director is suggesting and be able to adapt and kind of interpret that in your own way. And that's, that's true collaboration right there. So those are some of the tidbits, at least, that we generally give to clients whenever they're preparing for an interview.
If I'm interviewing an editor to work on a movie, what do I ask them? Like with cinematography, and production design, it's so easy to look at things. And I guess with an editor, you can like maybe talk about your favorite scenes or rhythm and pacing. But what are some good questions to ask an editor?
Well, I think as far as when you're talking to an editor, you're really talking about an overall story. So I think when you're having a discussion about the script, I think the things that are important and that, we talk to our editor clients a lot is, what are the emotional beats? So it's the questions of like, what did you connect with emotionally, and why, and sort of how do you think you could enhance that? What are the important components, sort of to creating the emotional impact you want? So it's really talking about the story overall and who the characters are, what are the themes of the story, and also very importantly talking about the tone and the type of tone that you're trying to create, and then asking the editor of, based on the script, like, what is your interpretation? And then, talking about what you're trying to accomplish and getting their take on how they think they would go about accomplishing that tone.
That's interesting. Matt, have you interviewed like editors or DPs? Like, when do you ask them when you?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that so much of my early career was a lot of matchmaking. It was always like, oh, this is the editor that did the last sketch that we shot of this series, so they're going to cut this one. And you either click with them or you don't, and you just kind of like, you're cycling through that. Coming up in sketch, you just get to work with a lot of different crew members all the time, and sometimes you're bringing in your own people and sometimes not. So it was very rare that I would do an interview, because it was always like, oh, just we already have a working relationship. And if I was curious about someone, you have kind of like small, low stakes environments to see if the collaboration is a fit or not, which is what I like about commercials. But there's just this extra layer of client facing affability and presentational elements that don't guide my decision making, but like, we all have met great editors who are a little grumpy and wear sweatpants a lot, and they are awesome. But also, like, you can't session with them
They don't like notes.
Yeah, they roll their eyes or whatever. And I think, Oren, you and I have careers because we're good at not rolling our eyes and turning bad notes into decent ones, perhaps, right? So to me, it's interesting to try and basically shotgun all of the tiny little social moments that you have shooting with someone for a couple days or over the course of a few months at different times, or having coffee with them or lunch with them, into a single meeting, right? Like if you're going to go shoot a feature with someone, that you're really in the trenches with them. You have to assume that any person that you're meeting with, any person that Louiza is repping, they're already awesome. They can do the job. So much of it to me is personal. Is
Right,
like,
right.
oh, do you get it? Do I want to spend 18 hours a day with you for the next couple months? That's the question. Like, are you gonna roll your eyes at me when I ask something dumb? Do you know what I mean? Or like try out something that's physically impossible, or like suggest something that you already tried. All of those things are the questions for me. Or get super excited at something silly. You know what I mean? Like I can't tell you how many times I'll be like, let's get some plexiglass and shoot blood at the lens, or like, kind of like those silly film schooly ideas. I still get really excited about that stuff sometimes. And like a DP who's there to like roll with it and plus it, that's what I'm looking for basically. So
Yeah. But I feel like of your clients, I mean, you're kind of, probably one of your more famous clients is Shane Hurlbut, who, has shot giant movies, famously Terminator Salvation, but also is the type of guy that would get the plexiglass and the ketchup bottle, like he's like, I feel like a lot of these DPs, especially like at the top levels, like still love that like kind of DIY mentality of like, let's grab the camera and get in the car and shoot that thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And Matt, to your point, I couldn't agree more. I do think personality match and just shared sensibility, I think, is a huge component. Whenever you're thinking about hiring a DP or editor or production designer, I think that's a huge component. And also, frankly, actually for us too, whenever we're thinking about bringing on a client, it's about the talent, of course, but it's also about the personality. And as you said, as a director, you're spending, months on end, especially with an editor. For us, it's similar. It's like if we're going to be working with a client, hopefully for years to come, like we want to be enjoying the conversations we're having. So personality is definitely, I think, a very big component, and shared sensibility and shared way of seeing the world, and then also just approaching storytelling, I think is definitely an important component whenever you're hiring.
Yeah, I think so. Your client, David Rom, who shot my first movie,
Mm-hmm.
when I interviewed him, it was like, I'd say a B- at best interview. But
Oren,
I
how
had,
old were you when you were shooting this movie too? Out of curiosity,
I think
just
I was
as a
maybe 28. So like 2 years ago.
yeah.
So, he was like, I had a couple friends, a friend, Tim Cahill, that had just made a short that was at Sundance that David shot. And then the editor, Matt Barber, who's been on our podcast many times, another friend that had worked with David or knew David, they all were like, if I could pick anyone in the world to shoot my next short, my next movie, my next thing, it would be David Rom. And it was like, they were just so enamored by him that even though our interview was, and it was like my first feature, kind of first big project, I didn't really know what to ask a DP. It was just like off the recommendations, and kind of my strategy when I'm really fairly lost in terms of like how to do the interview from the director's side is I always just like look at their work, look at their shorts, look at their movies, look at the trailers, and just ask them like, so tell me about this, where did you film it? What were like the hard parts? What was fun? How'd you do this car crash? And I feel like those are the super easy conversations to have. And then they'll start saying like, oh, that night was crazy, or this director was crazy, or this director was amazing, and you start learning things. And David Brom, like I kind of famously, I've said this on the podcast before, told me like on the first day of our prep, he's like, you're not going to be one of those directors that just everything is about the movie and you expect everyone from like the PAs to the grips to the electricians to all only care about your movie because it's your movie. Like you're gonna have some perspective on what this means to the different people on set. And he kind of taught me like a little bit about that, because I think you come from the film school mentality, which I didn't go to film school, but that kind of DIY mentality where everyone is just going to like kill themselves for this project. And when you get to like more serious projects, it's like people don't want to kill themselves. They want to do good work and they want you to be prepared so you're not wasting their time on set, like trying to figure out what you're doing, And I also remember when we did a scene and we changed location last minute, and he's like, "Hey, how are we shooting this?" And I said, 2-shot and over the shoulders. And he said to me, "The 2-shot is the most boring shot in cinema." Like,
hard disagree, but his point was right.
Sketch Matt. But in commercials, a lot of times we travel, and when we're lucky, we get to bring our DPs. I've never personally been able to bring a production designer with me, and a lot of times when you're shooting in other places, you kind of want a local person that knows the locations, that knows the crew, that knows like where to get the stuff. There's the advantages, I think, of a local production designer. And so I have had to interview a lot of them. And recently I interviewed 2 in New York. First one was real nuts and bolts. I talked to her about like the colors and the things that we wanted to have in our location and how we wanted to dress the set. And she was, very much like budget conscious, well, we might be able to afford this. I got to I still haven't talked to the producer. We'll figure this out, like what we can do. And the other production designer, who is a much more veteran production designer that's been kind of doing it for a very long time, just came right out of the gate with like, "I love the idea behind this." And this is a commercial, a 15-second commercial. Like, I love the idea here. Like, I totally connect to it. And it's like so relevant. And he just like instantly won me over by talking about the ideas of the commercial and like kind of making the logistics very much like not something I should worry about. And obviously at some point, like everything does come to like time and money. But in that first conversation, it's just like awesome to have a DP, a production designer, an editor, whether it's a 15-second commercial or a, 20 episode TV show, just come and talk to you about like why they're excited about the things and, or even the things that they think they have some ideas on how they could be better, because, not everyone is pitching on things that they instantly fall in love with,
I'm curious for our listeners at home who are maybe cinematographers, maybe they're editors. They're basically people who are curious to become repped by you or someone like you. What does an ideal early career client look like to you? And how do you source those people? How do you discover them in the first place?
The things that we look for are very much a point of view and consistency in the work, meaning when I look at the work, and this is specifically in regards to cinematographers, like the work has to be consistent in terms of the use of lighting and camera movement and things like that for me to be able to identify a certain point of view. So from a logistical standpoint, we do need an existing buyer base of some sort. It can be a smaller buyer base, but say you're coming out of commercials and music videos. So you should, if you have a good amount of buyers, meaning directors, producers that are coming to you asking to book you, then there's pre-existing business there we can build on. Again, I wouldn't put a quantity on that, but if we need something to build off of.
You're saying that they have to be working. You can't start
Correct.
someone from scratch. Like if someone's like, "Hey, Louiza, student loans are rough. Help me out." They're probably not in the right position to
No, yeah, I would
with
say, yeah, no. I mean, if you're coming fresh out of like film school, but you don't have much of a body of work, let's say you've only shot like a couple of short films, that will be really hard for us to work with. Again, an existing body of work to work with, and again, repeat business to a certain extent that we can expand upon. It could also be, having had like a couple features under your belt. It's obviously helpful if those features have gone to well-known festivals. That certainly helps. There's not really necessarily like a criteria that we strictly follow, because again, everyone's path is different. But an existing, like I said, buyer base is definitely important because we need something to build off of.
Right. That's interesting. I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, it's so flattering slash kind of out of body to be referred to as a buyer. Do you know what I mean? Like, as writer directors, I think of a buyer as a totally different person than like, you know, when I text my friend like, "Hey, are you available for this job?" You know.
Sure. Yeah, that's really more of I would say, a business term.
Sure.
And again, that's more of a way to kind of simplify a combination of like relationships, so to speak, that one might have. So, but you get the idea.
So you've recently started repping directors. Can you tell us a little bit about like how that works? Are you getting them jobs? Are you mainly doing negotiating for contracts that their buyer base is already coming for? Like, tell us, a lot of our listeners are directors. Like, tell us about what you do for directors, and like if directors even need an agent, or like, do they only need an agent at a certain point in their career? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that?
It depends on sort of where you are in your career. I mean, we have some directors, for example, like Lena Sokovska, who is super talented. She's very talented commercial director who is now transitioning to narrative. And when you're making that transition, there's definitely a lot of legwork that needs to be done as far as expanding your network. And so part of that is, setting up general meetings, helping her develop her own projects that she wants to direct, helping to take those out, and fostering new relationships for her and trying to, find new opportunities. It really depends on sort of where the client's coming from, like what their background is, what their experience level is.
Cool. And you specialize in features though, right? At WPA?
Yes, my specialty is features. I do cover Netflix 1 hour shows as well, but 99% of my time is spent on features.
I'm curious about what drew you to being an agent in the first place, actually, because you've got like a really deep background in terms of, trying your hand at a handful of things. Walk us through just kind of like the quick story of how you became an agent and why.
The simple answer is I fell into it. I went to USC Film School and thought I wanted to direct, as many do.
As they do, yeah, sure.
As they do, and directed some shorts and whatnot, and really enjoyed that process. So I always had passion for storytelling and appreciation for the whole process, the whole production process, the post process, all of it. And I realized when I was exiting film school is that obviously I needed to get a job. It wasn't going to be a job as a director, at least right away from film school. So my idea was, well, I should try different things and basically see what I like. And then that led to me working commercial production and gaining a lot of experience as far as like understanding how the sets run and so forth, but ultimately decided I didn't want to stay in commercials because it was, a little bit too far away from the actual storytelling for me. Then I pivoted and thought, I was like, well, I should get experience working in an agency because it's a great background to have regardless of what you do, because you get to be exposed to, who is making the projects and understanding kind of like how the whole machine works. And so I went to Paradigm, started to work there as an assistant in the production department. And then that's where I ended up meeting actually a lot of my colleagues that I still work with today. While I was at Paradigm, again, a lot of my colleagues that I work with still today, like I saw how they were all working and the care and thought they put into agenting, and I saw a rewarding side to being an agent, that it wasn't just transactional, but that you could make a difference and the clients' careers, and you can influence sort of how things, happen for them in terms of being able to open doors for them, give them guidance of like what to do in different situations, and what projects to take or not to take, and being that sounding board for them. So that ultimately is what appealed to me, because prior to that, I very much had the notion that, agents, again, were more or less car salesmen, and that didn't appeal to me. But I saw the opportunity to make a difference. And that's the why. And that's why I do it. I think that's why we all collectively do what we do at WPA. And it really has become my calling and something that I'm really passionate about. And I love doing every day. And I think it definitely obviously makes a big difference.
To me, being an agent seems like a really awesome job, but just like so difficult. Like, and also like kind of like a feast or famine type of deal. Like being an actor, like either you are at the top and you have clients like yours, or you're just like every day, like the koala bear from Sing, Matthew McConaughey's character. If you guys have seen that animated movie, DreamWorks, he's just like running around like, hey, let me rep you, I'll make you a deal, I'll get, and it's just like, that's why to me it's like so scary. But once you've kind of established yourself, it seems like a really rewarding job, because you get to work with super talented creative people and help them and be involved in so many projects. I feel like it's one of the few jobs that someone, that one person can touch so many different projects, because you have, a lot of clients. Can you give me like a rough rate of like, or a rough range of like kind of what an inexpensive cinematographer costs per day to like an expensive cinematographer? Like I know kind of my perspective, like what I think it is, but I'm curious if there's, like in the below the line representation handbook, there's like, a range.
Sure. And we're talking about commercials, or we're talking about
like
narrative?
Let's say I wanted to hire a cinematographer to prep for a week, shoot for 2 days, and shoot for 2 days. Let's say something like that. Like, what are kind of the ranges that?
I would say, obviously, it always depends on the person's expertise, and then of course, like also relative usually to the budget as well. On a low budget commercial, and if you're starting out, in the commercial space, you're probably looking at like 1,000 a day, on a higher end commercial, for a DP. I mean, you're talking about 5,000, potentially higher, if we're talking about award winning cinematographers. So, I would say 5,000 a day and above, at that level.
And so let's say that's awesome. That's kind of, I work with some producers that say, like, is this project the $2,500 a day DP, or is this the $5,000 a day DP, or the $1,000 a day? And in their mind, there is a difference between, like the final product is different, but also like a $5,000 a day DP probably needs, more support. Like first of all, it's going to probably be a union shoot, and it's probably, they're going to need an operator, and they're going to need a DIT, and they're going to need like these other things and camera prep. And how does that, so let's say you hire someone that's, let's say $3,000 a day, just to throw out a number there, and there's a week of prep. Like, is that $3,000 for a shoot day, or how does it work in terms of like how much at the end of the day do they get?
Yeah, what's the project fee versus
I mean, typically our clients working at the same daily rate for prep and shoot, unless there's, some exceptions that needs to be made and it's a project they have to do. There might be some concessions made. but typically it's the same rate for prep and shoot.
And so if it's a scout that's just like 1 hour of the day or something, they would get their full day rate for that.
I mean, if it's literally an hour, there perhaps could be a conversation had about like what that looks like monetarily. But typically, like I said, it is usually like the same daily rate. So, and also typically it's one of those things sometimes, even like we're talking about like travel days, travel days, generally speaking, are also at the same rate. But usually what happens is like, you're not just traveling, you're also like coming to wherever you're going, and then you're scouting or you're having meetings or what have you. So we ask all those details, and again, we assess things, and then again, it's a case by case basis.
Yeah, I like to corner my DPs on the airplane. Just block shot lists with them.
Yeah. It's for a long time, I never wanted to know what anyone was making, because like DPs are a great example where it's like, oh, your day rate is less than my day rate. But if you figure in all of the unpaid time I have on phone calls and pitching and all that stuff, you start doing the math and you're like, dang, maybe I should have been a DP instead of a director.
Yeah, I know. You never want to know as a director that the DP is just making way more money.
Yeah, you just see it's like, oh wait, you own that Alexa? That's like it's like $150,000 for the gear you got right there, buddy. So
yeah. How does gear play into it? Does that usually go through you, or would that be like a separate deal between the producers and the DPs if they own like the camera package or they own some other gear?
That's a good question. It's usually a separate deal that we typically don't handle. So that's usually between the DP and the producer. So, and we have some DPs that own equipment that is at a camera rental house. So sometimes, it's a conversation of, a deal to be made through the rental house to rent their gear. So yeah, that's not generally something that we negotiate. We may have a discussion with the producer about bringing our client's gear onto the project, but we don't actually handle that part of the negotiation.
Right. Because I guess sometimes, especially on the lower budget things, it's like, hey, I know the rate's a little low, but we are going to get,
we're going to rent your camera. So don't worry. Yeah.
And it is a little bit unfair, obviously.
Sure.
Because they should be getting paid for both things.
They did invest tens of thousands of dollars on a camera. Yeah.
And then, so I'm assuming for features, it would be a little less expensive, right? On a day rate. Like if you're shooting for like an indie feature for 25 days, let's say, that same DP that's getting $5,000 a day on a commercial probably is not getting $5,000 a day for like a month of prep and a month of shooting, are they?
I would say yes, for the most part. Yeah, that would be very, very difficult, I think, for any production to pay that amount on a small budget indie. So yeah, typically, again, in the indie space, again, it varies based on the budget, and also a lot of times it will also vary in terms of like how much is being spent on the cast, versus how much is being and producer director fees versus like the production budget. But yes, you're correct. Like, on an indie, certainly like on a smaller indie, it will be closer to like, 1,000 a day. Again, it's going to vary on, the size of the budget, whatnot. So, and who it is. So,
does ownership or like points play into it at all? Like if, on an indie film, do you ever negotiate that?
Yes, we do negotiate that. Typically it is more on, much smaller budget films that cannot afford the rate the client is used to getting. So we do negotiate that as far as like back end points or perhaps like a sales bonus or something like that, that's definitely something that we talk to producers about.
While we're just in the nitty gritty on money, there's got to be, especially for your emerging clients or younger clients, people who don't have as many credits as some of the people on your roster, there's got to be circumstances where the money that the client is taking home isn't really the incentive, that the feature is going to be really special. It has the opportunity to pop. They're really going to get to show a different side of their creative personality or whatever it is. They're creatively driven to want to do this movie.
Yeah, it's got some interesting talent attached.
They're not really making a ton of money. They're not making much money at all, let's say, right? There's got to be a calculus for the agency, because if your client is making peanuts, then you're making 10% of a peanut, right? So, but at the same time, you're still invested in their career on the long term. Walk us through, I guess, maybe just like your attitude about that sort of work, presuming that you're on the same page with your client, that like you do think it's worthwhile creatively to do this and good for a good career decision, basically, that it's not going to be a embarrassment or a waste of their time in some way.
Mine and WPA's philosophy has always been follow the art and the money will follow. So we're always in favor of clients doing artistic work that they're passionate about. So regardless of how much it's going to pay. So if the client is passionate about doing, $1 million movie that's going to pay peanuts, and we all collectively think, yeah, that's a great move because the story has a lot of potential. This director has a lot of potential. The client is over the moon about the project. We wholeheartedly support that. So that has always been our mentality, and I think it's something that is a very important component, because ultimately, like, if you do good work and you making decisions in an educated, smart way about you're following your instincts, you're following the creative, that's going to continue to progress your career forward. If you're only following the money, it's going to be a lot of the same. And ultimately, you create a career that is likely going to be less fulfilling and less curated in terms of, your entire body of work. So yeah, absolutely. Like, truthfully too, as far as like when you're talking about quality of scripts, really small independence is where a lot of the best stories are. I mean, we talk about that a lot. And that's, again, one of the reasons why, as I mentioned, like, I love going to festivals, because a lot of the films that I see, for example, at Sundance, tend to be my favorite movies that year. So usually some of the best creative is in the independent films. And again, those don't pay a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for being open about that. Really the reason we're asking about this, aside from just us, kind of being curious for ourselves, is like, I think there is just a fear, like there is just an assumption that people like can't afford to get this great, or that, but like nuts and bolts, actually, maybe they can't, they have $100,000 to shoot something for a day or two, and they can probably get, one of your clients to shoot, like $1 million movie, if it's the right script, if it's this, then, like, I don't know. It's something that I personally like struggle with, which is sometimes like, oh, this is a small project. Like, can I ask this really acclaimed person to be a part of it? And what I'm finding is a lot of times, yeah, you can. And obviously the worst thing you can hear is no. No, we can't do that. But you can also hear yes. Like, I appreciate you talking to us about how agents can be, resources, obviously for their clients, but also for like the directors and the filmmakers and the people that come to you. to work with your clients. Hopefully people learned something from this interview. Thanks so much for talking to us.
I hope so too.
Do you have a minute to hang out with us to do an unpaid endorsement?
Sure.
Unpaid endorsements.
My unpaid endorsement is the GQ write-up of James Cameron called The Return of James Cameron, Box Office King. It's like a kind of a long form piece about, his career. He's got the new Avatar sequel coming out, and, it's kind of in the midst of early reactions to Avatar and kind of this new emerging narrative that we all thought that James Cameron was insane for spending so much time and so much money trying to make these movies, but the guy never misses. He's going to top the box office again. I love Terminator 2. I really love Terminator 2.
It's my favorite movie of all time.
So good. Don't get me started. I guess I'm excited for Avatar 2 is what I'm saying. And no matter what, there's so much to learn from that guy. He's so specific and singular and competent across the board. They say that James Cameron can do any person's job on set kind of better than most people doing them. And so, I guess he's maybe a little surly sometimes, but there's a lot to admire about him. And it's a great piece that addresses that, asks him about that. He kind of confronts it, digs in a little bit on the myth of James Cameron on the eve of this new movie coming out. So the Return of James Cameron, Box Office King. I can't wait to hear what you all think of Avatar 2.
So my unpaid endorsement is this amazing film that's coming out on December 23rd, and that's called Living. Oliver Hermanus directed it. WPA client Jamie Ramsey shot it, and I got to see it at Camera Mage Cinematography Film Festival last month, and I think it's an amazing film. It's very heartwarming and aspirational. Talks a lot about the choices we make in our life and what we decide to spend basically our life on in terms of what is important and who is important and how the decisions we make ultimately impact also the experience, the life experience we have. So definitely highly recommend watching it. It stars Bill Nye, and it's a beautiful, masterful piece of filmmaking, and I think it's definitely worth seeing.
Kaplan, what you got?
The podcast I'm just so obsessed with, and I apologize if I've talked about this already, but is Conan Needs a Friend. It's a Conan O'Brien podcast. I think it's been on forever. Did I talk about it already, Matt?
Yes, you did.
I did. Sorry. I just listen to it every day because I was a real political podcast junkie for a while. First, I was a filmmaking podcast junkie, then a political podcast junkie. And now I just want to laugh and not worry about things. And it's just, it's so good. There's an app. It's okay. It's called Photo Circle. And I just used it on my last shoot. And it's basically if everyone on the production is taking photos, behind the scenes photos, and clients and agency and whoever, it's like an Apple iCloud album, but it's forever. You don't have to have.
So everyone uploads their photos to.
Yeah. So everyone uploads their photos from their phone to the Photo Circle group, and you can comment on it. But you also get if you all go to an event together, you make this Photo Circle group, and then you get everyone's photos. So anyway, those are my things.
Awesome.
Well, awesome. If we want to learn more about you, Louiza, are you on Instagram? Should we go to the WPA website? What's the best way to find out more about you and what you're doing?
I would say go to the WPA website. That's WP-A.com. I would go there because we were very active in terms of promoting clients' work, and you can kind of see the latest updates there. And I'm also on Instagram, Louiza Vick, if you'd like to find me there too.
Well, you can tweet us, Instagram us, all of that stuff. If you have any questions about the show, want to follow up in any way, at Just Shoot It Pod across all social media. You can email us at justshootitpod@gmail.com, and you can hit me up on social media at Mr. Matt Enlow across everything.
And I'm at Smitey Pyleg on Twitter. I'm at OKaplan on Instagram. This episode was edited by Noah Bayshore. Our producer is Tyler Smalls. And the music that we're listening to is from the Free Music Archive and the Artist Jazar. And we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.